Hey, welcome to the Trinity Podcast. We are so looking forward to our conversation today. Right here at Trinity, we want to help everyday people discover an extraordinary life with God. So we thank you for tuning in. I've got some special guests on the podcast with me today. This is Daniel Riddick. You've seen him before on the podcast, and Tom Messer. But we have a very special guest. This is Christie Messer. This is Pastor Tom's daughter. I'm looking forward to this because we can get some really good information. All these stories we've always wondered about Pastor that, Christie, I'm sure you have a whole list of them today, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
I'm happy to spill the beans.
Yes. So that's what today's going to be about. No, it's not really. But we're excited to have Christie on here. And as you know, we've been in a series called God Encounters. We've been looking at these different Christophanies and appearances of God in the Old Testament. But today we're actually getting into the story of Elijah, and that's what our conversation was about this weekend, and if you were at any of our locations. But maybe not dig so much into the passage of the story of Elijah, but today we really want to talk about the overall experience and what we learn from that passage that's directly related to mental health. It is a buzzword right now. Obviously, ever since the pandemic, it's been, I was reading some statistics. This is from U.S. News. It says this: the percentage of U.S. adults who reported receiving any treatment for their mental health over the past 12 months went from 19% in 2019 to almost now 22% in 2021. Now, we know that that's probably because, a lot of normal things that usually happen, but I think the pandemic also had a lot to do with that. And it's a very important topic that I'm looking forward to having a conversation today. But Pastor, I'd like you to do this. Could you just set the stage for this idea of, we don't want to get so narrowed on a certain part of mental health today, but just kind of an overall broad kind of swipe with a brush of mental health, and how do we speak about that from the perspective of in church life and in culture?
Sure. Well, let me just set up a little bit by saying I'm really looking forward to this. I love being with you two guys and having Christie here. I just had this flashback to all the stories I've told about her all these years, and now we're giving her a microphone. And
it's going to be so good.
That could be a little dangerous there, but and I think this is an important topic. Daniel has talked about this a little bit in times past, that this is one of those things that when you address it in church, it resonates with people. And I think we have to be careful that we don't, like, for example, very specifically narrow it to, hey, Elijah was depressed, we're going to talk about depression.
Yeah. We
have to realize that we're complex people. We're body, soul, and spirit. And we have outer lives, our physical life. And what we do with physical rest and how we steward our body really matters. But we're not just a body, we're also a spirit, and there's an inner life. And so what we're going to talk about today is that whole idea of what happens to us on the inside. And, I don't know where I heard this several years ago. Somebody said it to me this way, that your inner life is defined by how you respond emotionally and with feelings, how you respond inwardly to what's happening outwardly. So anxiety, depression, disappointment, all of the kind of emotions and feelings that we have. Insecurity can be, part of your inner life, and self-worth, all of those things matter. And so it's complex, and I think we have to be careful that I don't want people to hear this and say, like, for example, we're not medical doctors, we're not giving, medical advice about this, and we're not licensed professional counselors, we're not giving, necessarily.
This isn't therapy.
Right, yeah, exactly. But we are trying to bring a word from God and a perspective from God's word to speak into the realities, the complex realities of what happens on our inside. And, depending on who you are and how you're hardwired and what your DNA is, some people have more difficulties and more sensitivities to their feelings and emotions. And some people left. It doesn't make you better or worse, stronger or weaker. That's not the point. The point is we all have these inner lives. And we're going to try to kind of talk through how we should be responding. And if we respond correctly, then think it helps us to be able to influence others, kids, friends, people that we're trying to bring along in their faith. So I think it can be a really, really important subject for us to talk about.
Joel, one of the interesting kind of dynamics about this whole conversation about the inner life is that the connectivity to our outer life. It's not just connected to when bad things are happening, but how significant even sometimes our successes can have a real pull at us internally. And in fact, in this story with Elijah, it's on the heels of, maybe arguably the most literally mountaintop spiritual moment. And then, you turn the page and he's asking God to kill him. And so it's interesting that this isn't just about, hey, things are going bad and now I'm feeling a certain way. This can be about how we're experiencing success or failure. I think the other thing too is seasons of life. You talk with obviously student ministry, and this is a lot of people would actually describe it as like an epidemic in teenagers right now, struggles with mental health. I think you talk to just about any parent, especially younger parents. You've got young children in the home, and on one hand, for a lot of us, that's the dream. How this is these gifts from God and all that, and simultaneously it is wrecking us on the inside, and we don't know what to do with it. And probably every life stage. And so I think what Pastor Tom said is so important. It is not just the inside or the outside; it's about the two of those connected, and how we respond and what God's truth says about it.
Well, I'll speak right to that, and we'll throw you into the deep end, Christie. Are you ready? No, but I think that's a great point that Daniel brings up. I'm sure when you were growing up, there was the dream of being married and having a home and building a family, and you might have been one of those girls that wrote their name and then wrote the last name of the boy they liked and see how, I don't know, maybe not, but
I did. I couldn't show my dad. I wasn't allowed to date my husband when we were in high school, and I ended up marrying him. Yeah, but I remember.
Well, let's
get into it.
Can we park it? Can we park it right there? You weren't allowed to date your husband in high school, but then you married him.
Yeah, but we didn't date until after college. So, but still,
they both needed a little growth. By the way, Patrick, her husband, who I love dearly, has said in the context of this conversation, I wouldn't have let her date me either.
So he needed a little time there you go, to win your dad over. But my question is, so you have this dream of building a family and marrying the love of your life and having kids, but then simultaneously, from a mom's perspective, what would you experience this idea with your kids, whether it's anxiety, fear, or worry, or maybe from your perspective, what would be a question that you would have?
Well, never have I experienced anxiety like I did when I became a mom. It's like, and I've talked to so many other moms who are in the same, it's just your whole world, and they're walking around. I've heard that saying, it's like having your heart walking around outside of your body. But yeah, totally. And I've also noticed now that Tripp is starting to have little bits of anxiety. He gets anxiety about getting car sick. And so, I'm trying to think of it from how I'm dealing with my own anxieties and then also shepherding him. So here's a question. Is having anxiety a sign of weak faith?
No, it's well, okay. So let me answer this let me give it the broad answer, then I'll narrow in. It's a controversial subject that like you can go on one extreme where people will say that there's no such thing as spiritual depression, and think I just said spiritual depression, not depression. And the way I would probably better characterize that is that when we have anxiety or we're dealing with things, it's oftentimes, it can be chemical, it can be medical, it can be all sorts of things. But oftentimes what we're doing is we're failing to apply spiritual truths and realities and resources that God has given to us. So, the Bible recognizes that be anxious for nothing, right? In other words, don't be controlled by your anxiety. In everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, make your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God. Well, so the lesson there is, it's very natural. Every single person, because we're subject to infirmity. We're subject to to living in fallen, broken world with fallen and broken emotions. So yeah, we're going to be controlled by our fear. We're going to have to face our anxieties. We're going to have disappointments. We're going to have wounded spirit. All of those things. The Bible gives us an answer to those. And so what I would say is anxiety is not a sign of weak faith. What is a sign of weak faith is your inability to trust the resources or apply the resources that God has made available to you. And maybe not your ability, but your unwillingness or your hesitancy to access the Word of God and the Spirit of God, which are given to you to help you deal with these very real feelings and emotions that you are going to go through in every season of life.
I think oftentimes I think that is a incredibly real question. Hey, just because I'm experiencing this, is this an evidence of some kind of deficiency? And I think religious people, moral people, we like to, or we tend to detach every deficiency in our life, if we're not cautious about it, to some weakness in maybe our relationship with God or how we view God. And while I think what Pastor Tom is saying, that may be a part of the equation, I think oftentimes it's not the whole picture. And I think in many ways the question is, what are we going to do with what we're experiencing? And does the fact that I am worried or experiencing maybe even more chronic levels of anxiety, the question is, where are we going to turn to solve it or to receive help? And that's where I think that there's a difference between being spiritually deficient and being a place where I acknowledge that I have a need in my life that I need support in. And I would actually argue an awareness, and I have said this to people many times about other issues. They'll come up and say, "Hey, I'm dealing with this in my life. Do you think is there something wrong with me, spiritually?" And oftentimes I will reply, the fact that you are acknowledging it, aware of it, and seeking, help for it is an evidence of the work of the Spirit of God in your life.
Yeah.
And so coming to a place where you're feeling depressed or worried or real anxiety, the acknowledgement of that and realizing, hey, there might be something that's not right going on in my experience. I would almost say in many cases it's an awareness that hey, I need to attend to this in my life. It could be the opposite of a lack of faith.
So go ahead, Pastor.
Yeah, and just one thing to keep in mind, maybe this would be better served at the end, but to keep in mind is, and I actually said this last week in a couple weeks ago, actually now in sermon, but some problems in the Christian life you have to think your way through, right? Some problems in your Christian life you have to respond or you have to feel your way through them. You experientially deal with them. And some problems in the Christian life you have to act your way through. You have to live your way through, because it's mind, emotion, and will. Okay, if you don't get the thinking part right, you're always going to struggle on the feeling and the action. And so what Daniel just said is really important. Those resources are available to us, and we got to remember they're spiritual resources.
Right. They're
spiritual realities that we hold as true, and we have to find a way to work them into our life. That's what we mean when we use this expression. You got to learn to preach the gospel to yourself. You've got to learn to take a promise from God and work it into your inner life so that reality begins to become a part of your mechanism for dealing with the feelings and the emotions and the circumstances and the trouble that you're going through. And so I think if people are struggling, hey, we all do. Everybody struggles. Think, let your thinking, what you know, inform your feelings, and what you feel shape how you act. And that will be, it's a simplistic way, but that is the blueprint to dealing with the struggles on the inner life.
Yeah, Pastor, you hit right on a cycle that I regularly walk teenagers through, is the idea it starts in the mind And, it starts with your thoughts. Your thoughts are going to influence your feelings, and your feelings influence your actions. And then it cycles back around to your thoughts again. Again, just speaks to the importance of renewing our mind daily, preaching the gospel to ourselves. So this past week, we did a special chapel here at Trinity Christian Academy in the upper division with our 7th through 12th grade about mental health, and had 2 counselors on stage. And what's so interesting is I asked the teachers, which I love our teachers at the academy. They're just so willing to do whatever to help their students. I asked them to put a QR code on the screen a week before this chapel to collect questions on mental health. And it was an anonymous submission. The kids didn't have to put their name down or anything. At first, I was a little worried. I'm like, man, I hope we get enough questions. If not, I'm just going to have to make up my own questions. Literally, the first day that they showed that, I went over to the online submission form. We had over 100 questions in like the first 12 hours. And they were across the board on everything. I had to dwindle them down to like 15, but it was difficult because there were at least 90 questions. And I'm like, we need to be talking about this.
Right.
So it is a very big deal with kids and teenagers. They just proved it to me by submitting all those questions. So here's a question I have. So to help parents with their kids, what is the line where you're talking to your kids, you're trying to help them through fear, anxiety, worry? Is there a line that's crossed where you say, I need to take this the next level to professional help? Just to help parents have an idea of how much should I try to field on my own with my kids to help them walk through this? And then is there a line where I've got to say, okay, we need to take this to the next level to get professional help?
If I can share a personal story here, because Jen and I have done this and kind of walked all the way through it. And I think we have shared this before, so this is not anything that we've not talked about. But there came to a point with one of our kids a number of years ago where it was like, to use the expression, you just felt like you were beating your head against the wall. It's like we're going through all these emotions, or we're dealing with the same kind of challenge. And it wasn't like about a specific behavior, but it was this bigger picture. And it was kind of clear, it's not working, and by the way, there's a real temptation, especially in parenting. And Christie, you just had said this a little bit ago. It's like you can quickly get into, I am a terrible parent, very fast. And I think we were there, it's like, we're bad parents, maybe we've got a bad kid. I don't know. But, and we were just like, we couldn't. And finally it was kind of, hey, maybe we should sit down and talk to somebody. And we did. And I'm not sure why, but we felt nervous about talking to somebody about it. We, I'll be honest with you, didn't want to tell anybody we were talking to somebody about it. And yet the experience of walking through that, sitting down with a professional family counselor, and it ended up just being, one, relieving, because we got to hear somebody who was outside of the middle of our kind of circumstance go, hey, on the grand scheme of things, what you're dealing with is not the end of the world. Yes. And then two, help coach us with some what ended up coming out of it was very practical solutions or ideas to help us navigate it. And my only thought after that was, I'm not sure why we didn't have this conversation months ago.
Yeah.
That's really good. Two perspectives that are helpful is, I think we are a little bit in a danger zone in current culture. And one is there's a tendency to want to over counsel about everything. There's just that is the solution to everything. I think the other danger is that there's still a stigma about needing to seek out help. And if you think back, like there's a great verse in Proverbs, as cold waters to a thirsty soul. So when you're really thirsty, there's nothing like cold water. So is good news from a far country. That's actually it's a gospel, it's a foreshadowing of gospel reality. The principle there is, while oftentimes you can figure out on your own, the answer is in the heart of a man. Sometimes it takes a counselor from the outside to draw the answer out from the inside so that he can see it. And so you need outside help. We're built for relationships. We're built for people that come alongside of us. I don't think the first answer is you send somebody to a counselor, but I think it is an answer. And I've learned over the years that there comes a point in time, particularly if you think about in parenting, and I have it from parenting and pastoral, but when you think about it from parenting, you're better to be a parent to your child than to be a counselor. There's a part of parenting that is counseling, and you clearly have to do that. But there does come a point where your kids need you to parent them, and not. And my kids say this to me sometimes, Christie, and has said it, and the boys say it to me. I don't want you to be my pastor. I don't want you to quote the Bible to me. I want you to be my dad. And I think you have to do that. I think you have to step back at points in time and let them get good news from a far country. Let somebody come alongside of them who has the skill and the wisdom and maybe even an unbiased, more objective. I'm not objective when it comes to my kids.
Right.
The boys, I want to be. We'll suck it up and figure it out. With Christie, it's going to be, well, honey, you're smarter than that. Just think it through. You can do that. And that's not always what they need. Sometimes they need you to be more empathetic and helpful, but they need to hear maybe truth you would say from somebody outside of them that validates that. And they're like, okay, my dad is not as nutty as I thought he was. He's not the only person that thinks this way. And it really does give them an insight and perspective.
Christie, why is that from a daughter's perspective? Obviously, you want to get counseling and advice from your dad. How does it help you, though, maybe hearing from a third party or someone else? Why does that make a difference for you?
Well, I actually just went through this in May. My anxiety was I realized I was at a point where I needed to get outside help. And so my dad actually found me someone that she had no idea who I was. And, she was very unbiased. And I went to talk to her, I think 4 times. And
she told you how smart I was.
yes, that was it. And we walked
That's all
out
you
of
needed.
there, and that was
good.
the end of the counseling. No, it just helped me trace things that were happening in my life and connect them, and then I don't know. I guess it was just clarified everything that, and I still have anxiety.
Yeah.
But it just was it just helped me to walk through it.
Well, okay, so let's get really in the nitty-gritty for a moment, and again, think of all the things you guys are talking about. I was watching Tripp, who's my oldest grandson. Her son played baseball last night, and he's such a good little athlete. One of the great joys of my life to watch him. And her husband said, my son-in-law said, Tripp's in La La Land, which he can do. And I was said to myself, thinking, yeah, but wait till he hits 13. You've never seen La La Land until he gets in that. And it just made me think about all these things that we're gonna end up going through. There's trigger and trauma events that happen to people. Okay, and think I'm not referring to that necessarily with you, although clearly you guys have to, when you go in and you're talking about, hey, we need a little bit of help, you find out that it may not even be the one issue that got you there.
Right.
There's other things that get, and so it makes it more complex. Same thing with you. It's not my anxiety about the moment. It's actually these things that have happened in my past. And so, like we talked about Elijah in the last sermon, and, it's easy to look at Elijah, one word from Jezebel threw him for a loop. There were trigger events. There's more to it. It's more complex than that. And so we should be saying to people, your whole life is a series of events, some good and some bad. Some things you process and think through. Other things you carry with you. They become that emotional baggage, there's a good term, that you carry. And then you hit a trigger event and you think that's the root cause. It's not the root cause. It's symptomatic of this other traumatic experience that's in your past. And if you don't learn how to deal with the previous historical trauma, all these trigger events become more real. They become more regular in your life. And just the two things that they've talked through, and think, here, I look at them both as kids, and and I know that's not a good thing, but it does my heart good to think about. But they've had to face things, honestly, that'll make themselves healthier. I mean, not that they're unhealthy, but it makes them better equipped to deal with their kids. Because what you don't want is 25 years from now, your kids to be all messed up because you didn't deal with the kind of anxieties and issues that came up. And so facing these things, I mean, Daniel talked about it very, very powerfully in the last podcast we did about his dad dying. And, that's going to have that. That's an event. It begins to shape and color the way he responds to a lot of things in his life. It's a reality. There's nothing we can do about that except for respond to it and process it through God's provision of grace, the Word and the Spirit to do that. Same with Christie. She goes to counseling not because, hey, she's a messed up person. She goes to counseling because she has an obligation to process these things in a healthy way so she doesn't pass on those anxieties to her own kids and carry this baggage. God wants her to live triumphantly. He wants her to live full of the Spirit of God and be fruitful. And that's true for me. It's true for you. It's true for all of us in those contexts.
I think one of the best things we can do in this conversation is not to necessarily point everybody. In fact, I think we're trying not to come up with a specific solution. Everybody, we're not sitting here going, everybody needs a therapist. Everybody needs to get an account. I mean, it probably would do a lot of us a lot of good, but that it's not about the solution. It's about calling out this reality that it is common and normal for us to need help. And Pastor, I think you said this word a minute ago. There is a stigma about this conversation. If I said, "Hey guys, I'm doing my taxes. I just hired an accountant," you guys wouldn't look at me and go, "Wow, okay, is everything all right?"
You're messed up.
Yeah. Or if I said, "Hey, I've got a weird noise in my car. I'm taking it to a mechanic."
Yeah.
Nobody looks at me and thinks, "Man, he's got a lot of things happening in life." No, I need help because I'm not an accountant. I need help because I'm not a mechanic. In some of these big areas of our life, our inner life, and then I think maybe the two other areas that get really stigmatized is parenting and marriage.
Yeah.
And maybe just relationships in general. We feel like, I can get help in every other area of my life and it's okay. If I let people know that I'm getting help because of what's going on inside of me or what's going on with me as a mom or a dad or what's going on with me and my spouse, we have this idea that people are going to think we are really messed up. And I'm over here saying it is a good, healthy, godly thing to seek out help. And we would be better off of all kinds. It is a powerful thing. And I'm thinking we enjoy doing it, to sit down and talk with a pastor, to engage a counselor. And for a lot of us, God's resourced this. It could be our spouse. They're a real help. Our parents, the relationships in our life. I think the big message, it's like if we could just pound the table, is, it's okay to acknowledge that there's something, not quite right, and then to pursue it in a healthy, godly, good way to receive, help and healing.
So one of my friends is a counselor, says something very similar to what you said, Daniel, talking about, mental health and counseling. He says, our body is full of many different organs. And if one of those organs is not functioning properly, we're going to go to a doctor. We're going to try to get advice. We're going to try to figure it out. But when we have issues with our brain, an organ of the body, we are, the way that we think, we feel like we can't go get help for that because it gets so stigmatized. So
here's let me do this.
Okay.
Okay. So, one of the things I find so interesting about Christianity is that we normalize vocabulary and terms in kind of modern culture terms, right? So, like, for example, it's very common for us to say, you need to ask Jesus into your heart, right?
Correct.
So point to your heart, right? Is it here or here, right? And when we talk about mental health, we are saying here, but we're really talking about the soul.
Soul,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And the soul is made up of mind, emotion, and will. So
Yeah.
I think we confuse the subject a little bit because we're simplistic in the way that we approach it. I think it's important that we realize that all of this fits under that really broad category. And so like in Proverbs where it talks about a wounded spirit in our life, right? The spirit of a man will sustain his infirmity. So if you're strong on the inner part of your life, you can handle sickness in your physical body. But if you have a wounded spirit, you're subject to problems in every area of your life. You lack the ability to heal, you lack the strength, you lack, it all fits there. So when we talk about that, you got to remember that, and the Bible says amazing things, right? That we should be renewed in the inner man, right? That the spirit needs to be strengthened, the spirit of a man, right? And so we got to, it's not, oh, I'm not doing well, so I just get a little bit of help, or I go to a counselor. Actually, there's a lot of things involved in that. And being right with God helps you enormously. Practicing the disciplines of the Christian life. So you don't start with, oh, you got a problem, I can't solve it, let me send you to a counselor. There's actually a moral, there's a philosophical, there's a relational component. Get into a good small group. A healthy small group made up of people that love you, know you, care for you, hold you accountable. All of those can be really important steps. Morally, get yourself right with God. Philosophically, realize that your future is secure in Jesus. And so there's a lot of prescriptions for dealing with this. And I think what we're being careful of is we don't offer you just one solution to the problem. And we don't want to minimize it, and we don't want to overstate it. What we want to do is say, this is, you're a unique person, complex individual made by God, and He's giving you all sorts of ways to process through these pain points in your life. And if you're living in isolation, the answer isn't a counselor. That may be on the path to answers. The answer is get into healthy relationships. Or if you're not in the Word of God and you're not having a relationship with God through His Word and through the Spirit of God, get into that. Those are all steps that you can take and begin to reframe the perspective and attitude that you have towards the problems that you're having in life.
That's why that the message that we gave on Sunday. That's why 1 Kings 19 is so powerful in the narrative, because it addresses this not one size fits all problem, and God, I feel like He gives us this powerful picture of how He ministers to the whole person. And Elijah's in this real crisis mode in her, and but it wasn't singular. It was, he thought he was alone, and through the course of God ministering to him, He lets him know he's not alone. I think it's interesting. Before he has the word from God, God says, "Hey, how about you take a nap and get some food?" And
a nap fixes a lot of things.
I mean, that's a comfort eater.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So angel food cake solves everything. Right?
But I mean, that's funny. But it's like sometimes it's like we disconnect the physical reality
really
of our
emphasize
life. And then, of course, he meets with God.
Yeah.
He gets the word of the Lord, and then he thinks his life is over, and God gives the whole thing, gives him a job to do, and so you realize, hey, what was going on in his life was not, like we're saying, it wasn't simple. And I think that's really important. It was complex, and then two, it didn't have a silver bullet solution. He needed to make some adjustments relationally. He needed to make some changes physically. He needed a word from God spiritually, and a refresh in the call of God on his life from a directional standpoint. And it just helps us get this whole picture that God is interested in the whole of us, every part of us. And all of those things contribute to what's going on inside of us.
So Daniel, funny.
Sometimes The best way to deal with a problem, go take a nap.
Yeah.
Sometimes the best way to deal with a problem is to go eat a good meal.
Right.
Sometimes the best way to deal with a problem is go get alone with God.
Yeah.
Right.
Sometimes the best way to deal with a problem is go back. Actually, what does he do? He meets with him in a way that actually reinforces. Here was the big need of his life. He thought God had forgotten him. God had forsaken him. God meets him with him in a way that says, you're not forgotten and you're not forsaken. I'm never going to leave you, right? And then what's he do? He sends him back out to do the same exact thing he was doing before.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to get back on the horse and
Reset.
Yeah, right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it is. Now, here's the thing. Simplistically, if you only take one of those and you think that's the answer, you're going to miss it. If you take all
broad
of those,
spectrum.
Right.
you say, man, that's really great advice, really prescriptive.
So Saturday, I was really, my wife could tell I had a lot on my mind. I was just stressed out about a number of things that were coming up, and I knew it was going to be a busy week.
I love that. Stress, I'd put stress in the same category as anxiety
Yes.
and
And
depression.
the
and
conversation.
Oh, yes, I feel that regularly. And my wife, it was a Saturday, like 2:00 in the afternoon. She was literally like, you just need to go lay down. Just go take a nap. And I don't take naps.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go lay down. I woke up from that nap at 7:00. I slept for 5. It's like one of those naps you wake up from. You're like, what time is it right now? But it was interesting that once I woke up, my wife actually said, do you feel better? And I actually did feel like I had a different perspective on everything just because I got a good amount of rest. So my question to that is, our circumstances that we're facing, are they really a matter of perspective? You know, especially in Elijah and what he was going through and what he thought God had forgotten him. Are circumstances really a matter of perspective? No matter what we go through, is it just super important at how we see those?
Makes you think.
Thank you, Dad.
Yeah, I've said this already, but it's how we respond inwardly to outward circumstances, and we tend to we either make things bigger than they are, or so I think sometimes in my case I can minimize how important things are, and it is perspective, and when I was in Israel, I did a trip a number of years ago, and they asked me to speak on. We were on a particular mountain, and they wanted me to talk about that, and so I'd been thinking about it, and we'd been kind of mountain peak to mountain peak in Israel, and I was thinking about all the mountain peaks in the Bible. Isn't it interesting? God takes people, Moses up on a mountain, Elijah, same mountain, right? Mount of Transfiguration, Mount. You got Mount of Olives. There's all these, but they're all on mountains. Why do you go to a mountain? Well, mountain gives you perspective. You look at things differently. You see things differently from height, right? Height always gives perspective, and so you have to stop looking at your problems from inside the problem, and you have to stop looking at your problem from a human perspective. You have to begin to interject a divine perspective into your problems. And when you begin to realize, hey, I may be in this, but God's put me here. God's put me here not without a reason or purpose. There's a reason and purpose behind why God has put me here. And oftentimes in the middle of our circumstances, we come to this realization, it doesn't depend on me. It never did, right? There's something bigger going on in my life, and he's going to use the circumstances to do something in me to change me, but he didn't put me in this to solve the problem. He put me into this to show me himself and show me how he is going to work out the problem. That's change of perspective.
Yeah.
And when that breakthrough comes, and that's what leads to breakthrough is, hey, I see this differently now.
So much of that perspective change, or within that conversation about that, I think is how we manage expectation. And, again, going back to the scriptural story here with Elijah, I think one of the big disappointments he's facing is that it's not what he expected to happen. He has the mountaintop experience, and in theory, this is only going in one direction,
Sure.
and then the next thing that happens is he receives a very credible, likely death threat. And you got to think, in his world, that was not how the story was supposed to unfold. And it completely, it wrecked him, literally. And he finds himself where he is in 1 Kings 19. And I think a lot of times our perspective is a lot of times about missed expectation when we struggle with it. This is a number of years ago. We were preaching through a family series, and I was, doing just a little bit of digging on like divorce rates, and the highest rate of divorce in marriages statistically is between years 4 and 7, and it coincides with, normally it's between 4 and 7, you have a child under the age of 5 in the home. It's not because kids cause divorce, but it's circumstance.
Well,
Here's one thing that hit me though, and then this is real practical, is, it would have been really helpful for me. And I look back, I'm reading this beyond that in my marriage, but I look back going, oh yeah, I felt that, that feels very real. And it would have been really good if somebody said, hey, listen, you need to know coming up down the road, it's not going to be exactly like you thought it was going to be. Sometimes when we get our expectations aligned right with either reality, spiritually, it helps change the way that we respond on the inside to what's going on in our outer world. Does it make it easy? Doesn't make the stage or the problems go away, but yet to your point, it does reshape the perspective about what God is doing or not doing, and what we're feeling or not feeling as we encounter those things.
I once heard someone say, along to what you're saying, Daniel, and I think of it regularly, just because something is not going your way, it doesn't mean that it's not going God's way.
Right.
And that's all about, it really is about our expectations. If they're not met, then something must be wrong.
Right.
So, Christie, I'm interested in your perspective. Okay. So, as we're talking about mental health, as we're talking about, one of the steps that we all have to take is to come to a point where we say, I do need some help. Because obviously, pride can tell us you're good, you can figure it out, lean on your own understanding, just try harder.
Pride can tell us we're good, or it can convince us that we're terrible. That's because true. Everybody else is.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very true. So for you, I am interested, obviously, as a mom and a wife, and you're holding, in a way, the home together and getting stuff, all that moms do. On top of that, you also are a pastor's daughter, and there's huge level of expectations that I'm sure you felt growing up, and maybe even still feel as an adult. Was it difficult for you to say, I need to talk to somebody? And then how did you get to that point to say, because I think that could be good for someone listening or watching this, that they're wondering, how do I navigate that?
Yeah. I decided from the get-go that I was not going to keep it private, because that's kind of my personality. I can be very open. And I just realized from the moment I said I needed help, that I needed to be honest with my friends and, not try to make this like, oh, I can't answer the phone right now, but I can't tell you why or where I am.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be really open about it. And I think I don't know, you remember that day that I texted you? It was just this, I knew I could not keep pretending like I was okay. And I think I'd mentioned that I wasn't doing great, and then I would talk to my dad, and then I would be okay for like a few days, or I'd talk to Patrick and we would get through it. But a lot of it I was just keeping inside.
Yeah.
And I, truthfully, it was just my emotions just did not let me keep it in anymore. And it was so freeing, because, when you're trying to solve your own problems, like I'm trying to tell myself, you're fine, this, get through the next 24 hours. You're gonna be, and it was during May, which May for moms is the most stressful month. There's so much going on. There's parties. Your kids are finishing school. You're about to be, in charge of them full time. And it was just, there was so much on my plate. And I just realized I needed someone else to help me solve my problems. And that I needed my dad to find my counselor. And Patrick called the counselor first, and he said, I'm going to bring my wife in. And that was what I needed. And you need to have someone that you can maybe get the ball rolling and get you there. And I'm so glad that I made that decision. I feel like all of a sudden, a lot of things became more clear to me, and I just wanted. And I've talked to so many other moms that are like, now, who was the counselor that you went to? You know? And I want them to feel like, hey, this is not weird. This is like a part of being healthy. And someone else told me, they said, you have to think about your brain too. Like you exercise your, your body, but also your brain needs to be in therapy sometimes. And that helped me.
One thing, so
good.
let me talk to you about this, Chrissy. So it's important you have a support system, right? And I think that, if you don't, if you're without a support system, the first step is to get in a support system somewhere, and you've got to reach out and say to whoever, hey, I need some help. I can't do this on my own. And I think the second thing is you actually have to be willing to follow through with it. And there's a lot of, over the years, I've gotten to a place now sometimes where I just ask people, if I give you advice, are you going to take it? Because sometimes you give a lot of advice and they just add it to all the other advice that they've gotten, and they're not ready to act on it.
Sure.
And so you got to have a support system. You got to be willing to follow through, because there comes a point where people can't solve your problems for you. You have to do something about it. So there is that. You have to act on it. But then you also have to be willing to change. And you get this, breakthrough is, I'm not going back to that. I'm going to this. And I may need coaching and different kind of support going forward. I think that's really important to realize. What was it you said? It's okay for you not to be okay. It's just not okay for you to stay there. I think that's our point.
Yeah.
Is there is help available. You get in a support system, get the help, follow through, and then live out the change, live out a new destination for yourself.
Yeah.
Hey, one thing, Joel, that we really ought to probably stress is we are set up as a church to have counselors available on staff. And so we want people to know you can reach out directly to us for help. You can send us an email. You could call a church office. You can drop a comment and ask for somebody to connect with you. But we do have people, and we may do some internal counseling. We may connect you to a pastor. We may connect you to people who've gone through similar experience, or we do have counselors on staff, and we have resources that we can recommend. I spend a lot of time connecting with professional counselors and recommending people to them. So Daniel's analogy, if you need a mechanic, if you need a lawyer, if you need an accountant, and if you need a counselor, you got to see the church as a place to go to. We'd be glad to direct people and connect you with people that can help you.
That is a great point. Thank you all so much for this conversation today. And definitely do reach out if you need some help or some counseling or someone to talk to. Our church would love to be a part of helping you find that person for you. Again, thank you so much for watching the podcast or listening in today. And we'd love for you to like or subscribe or follow this podcast on Apple. You can find it on Spotify or right on the Trinity app. We will catch you next time.